Every few weeks we commence another expert series. I want you to become as educated as you can, and so I'll be bringing you the top experts and information to give you as much knowledge as I possibly can. This week we started a new series, and it was my very great pleasure to have spoken to Ryder, who's a well-known expert and property hotspotter.
We try to identify for property investors the future hotspots in residential real estate because I believe that the thing that residential property investors want to know more than anything else is when the next areas of outperformance are going to be on capital growth.
Okay, so you identify the areas that you believe are going to be hotspots, but not based on past information, based on the kinds of stuff that you can know about the future.
I think it's very important. People who read mainstream media, property magazines, tend to be told the areas that have been hotspots in the recent past, and I don't think that's a great deal of use to property investors. They want to know the areas that are going to outperform in the near future. Fortunately, that's not a difficult thing to do as long as you know the factors to look for.
Now, you've got a lot of expertise in the area, but is it possible for an everyday investor to be able to acquire the skills they need and to recognise hotspots for themselves?
Yes, it is. They just have to know the factors to look for, and once they know the elements to look for, they then need a flow of good information, because it's not a lot of use for someone to know that a new motorway is going to create a hotspot in an area if they don't know that a new motorway is being built in the south of Melbourne, for example. They need to have that information coming in.
Okay, so can we then put all of those elements that make a hotspot into some key characteristics to help us to identify them?
Yeah, it is, and that's what I've done. Before I started my website, I spent 2 to 3 years just researching areas that had been hotspots in the past and trying to identify the elements that made them so. And I noticed there were some recurring characteristics that kept cropping up, and so I distilled all those down into 10 neat little packages of information, which I call creator categories.
Okay, so you said there's 10. Are you prepared to tell us what they are?
Well, absolutely, because I think it's part of what I do is to educate people how to identify these areas themselves. They don't need to refer to anyone else once they know what the characteristics are, and they are, some of these characteristics are things that we all know about, much publicised, such as sea change and hill change, which have been major movements in real estate over the last 10 years. Transport infrastructure is one of the big kickers that create hotspots. Urban renewal processes can lift areas and values. State government decisions can have a big impact on areas that are going to grow and show superior capital growth. There's a category I call the ugly ducklings, which are the cheaper areas with the potential to evolve into better things.
You talk about ugly duckling suburbs, and in future shows we're going to explore that a little further. Just because it's an ugly duckling suburb, though, doesn't make it a good place to invest, does it?
Well, no, it's not sufficient merely to be cheap. There are a lot of cheap areas out there, but most of them are cheap because they're duds. What you want is a cheap area that has identifiable reasons to grow and improve and show superior growth into the future. And that brings in another factor that's very important in hotspotting, and that is that it needs to have more than one of these characteristics. It's not enough to be a cheap area. You want a cheap area that's got new transport infrastructure coming, for example.
I've been finding as well, Terry, that I've got the 20 questions, which is the same kind of thing. It identifies the characteristics of an area that makes it a really good place to invest. But often when people buy, they only apply 1 or 2 of those questions, and therefore they don't buy well. They're not looking at the whole picture and finding an area that has as many of those characteristics as possible.
That's right, and I'm looking for areas that have got 3, 4, 5 or 6 of these creator categories happening there. I've never found one that's had all 10, but certainly you can find areas that have 5 or 6, and once you have identified an area like that, you can be pretty sure this is an area that's going to be a hotspot.
Terry now travels around the country going to the councils and interviewing the mayors about different hotspots. We're finding that those areas where council has really strong leadership and very crystallised plans for the future, they seem to be the areas